And today's guest is Tianna Madden. Thank you so much for coming on the
course.
show. I have a lot of questions to ask you.
Okay.
First, give us a little history about you. You grew up in Rochester. You're from Rochester originally? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, wow. My whole family is here, pretty much both sides. I have a younger brother, 4 years younger. He's actually taller than me, though.
Okay.
So everyone thinks he's my older brother. Both my parents, but it's not really much to tell.
Okay. And you're going to the Rochester Institute of Technology?
Yes.
And what are you majoring in?
I'm a double major right now, journalism and political science, and right now I'm still trying to figure out my minors.
What made you go into journalism? I know a little history about you, but before we go there, would you share with the viewing audience about your ideas of journalism and how this became of interest to you?
I originally started thinking about journalism maybe when I was around 11. When I was about 7 or 8, my mom's an English teacher, so I grew up around words all of the time. I loved reading, I loved writing. And when I tried to combine them, I realized I wasn't such a great novelist. And so around that time, my mom was very big about being socially aware. And we used to have really deep conversations, all when I was only about 10 or 11. And that's when I started noticing I had an opinion on things, and I would criticize the way some things were covered, like why are they focusing on this aspect and not that? And that's when I started to learn more about journalism and just the idea of writing, that you can use words to educate somebody on something else. So I thought that was really cool.
With the way that the media is changing now, from a young person's perspective, where is all this going to, from print media to the internet, viral marketing, social media? Where is all this taking us?
Well, I think the issue is the media doesn't want to be boring anymore, and going along that path of trying to be entertaining and connecting to the older people, the younger generation, and everyone in between, I think maybe we got a little bit confused. I know when broadcast and print media was first introduced to the internet, they did a lot of what's called shovelware, which is you just pretty much put the print article on the internet. You don't utilize anything that the web can do. And so what you're realizing, what you're seeing right now is a lot of new news outlets going purely into entertainment. And you also see it on your local news. If you catch the last 5 minutes, you actually sometimes see them talk about celebrities instead of hyper-local content, which is very interesting.
I've noticed with the media that because we don't have enough people, when I say people, we don't have enough people that look like us that can tell our story. Therefore, the media has projected an image of us that reflects many of us in a way that truly doesn't say who we are as a people. I like to ask you, when it's your time to be doing either print media, broadcast media, what will be your focus? I mean, what will you be focusing on?
Right now, I've kind of taken the perspective of a youth. I would like to actually go into more minority-based coverage, but that's really hard to do, because doing that, you're kind of saying that you understand the mindset of every minority person. And nobody likes to have assumptions made of them. So you also have the issue where statistically a lot of minority people don't read the news as much as white people. So you're kind of targeting an audience who isn't even interested in you. And we're already seeing that now when I'm trying to cover youth perspectives. And I'm getting more adults reading what I'm writing than youth. So I think until you have an audience that wants to hear more about themselves and wants to be more educated on issues and everything, you probably won't be as successful.
How do we bring people along to the party, so to speak? How do we get people to become interested? Because we've got to be able to find a way to be able to provide content that will help people make better choices, better decisions, and enhance the quality of their life. How do we begin to do that? And once again, from a young person's perspective, I think one of the things that we do as adults, we have this concept, these thoughts in our minds that this is the way things should be.
Right.
And one of the things that we fail to realize is that we're not going to always be here. And we're not asking young people their perspectives or what their input
Right.
should be. And so that's the reason why I'm asking you, how can we deal, what do we need to do?
I think number one, and I think the overall media has recognized this, you have to get your audience involved. You cannot just write to them. You have to say, you know, we're writing this and involve them into it. And I think for a while, that was a lot of newspapers' problems. They were only targeting the affluent and only covering news in the suburbs. And they weren't actually targeting the inner city and getting them involved and saying, there's a big thing, citizen journalism. And I think once you have citizen journalists, they're more likely to say to their friends, hey, I wrote this piece for this newspaper, check it out. And so just by involving this one person and him spreading it, you've actually involved all of his friends too. And they're gonna say, hey, you know what, these people, not only are they covering our news, but they're by us, they're for us, and all of that. So they're gonna take you more seriously, and they're not gonna just say, oh, this is another select group of people trying to take advantage of us and make money from us.
What is the voice of young people? What are young people interested in? What kind of news are they interested in today?
Wow, I would be doing the same. I don't want to say exactly what we're interested in just because that would be making the assumption of them. I think we need to give them a lot more credit, though, than what we have been. They are interested in social issues. They are interested in, especially inner city youth. They want to know why there is such extreme poverty where they live, and they do want to know, how do you get out of that? A lot of students are very interested in higher education and what does that actually bring to you, and can it actually uplift you from poverty? But I do want to say, in the short term, a lot of youth, we are interested in entertainment. We want to know what's going on with our favorite rappers, way more than we want to know about civil unrest in Syria. Like, just the idea of how distant that is. A lot of us won't go to Syria. We won't, and the long-term effects of Syria aren't as big as if our favorite rapper goes to jail. Then we won't get to hear their music for a while. So I think, when you look at it short term, youth are a little bit more interested in what affects them immediately.
Which is so different from when I was young, because our immediate concerns, we were into the music and into that culture, but because of the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, which attracted us into there. So this came into our living room, so we paid attention to this and wanted to be very much a part of this.
Right.
Are young people distant from that now, or do they think that there's no more struggle, or?
I think a lot of people, we do recognize there is struggle, but I think there's also rampant hopelessness. What can we do that Martin Luther King Jr. couldn't do? And, so I think where we are right now is kind of everything has been tried before and there's nothing we can do.
Oh my.
Yeah.
That's kind of sad.
And actually, if you'll see it in a lot of schools, if you're ever downtown around a lot of youth, you actually see them celebrate, I don't want to say ignorance, but you see them kind of celebrate not going anywhere. I don't know how to explain it, but you don't see them saying, hey man, you shouldn't do this because this isn't a very good idea. You'll see them say, hey man, that was funny. And then it goes from there.
Talking about it from this perspective, do you see your role in any way of being able to try to show some of these young people that it isn't hopeless? The reason why I'm mentioning that to you, or asking the question, is because we've come a long way. I'm quite sure the first people, or the first Black people who were brought on those ships, had to think that this was hopeless. I know when they got to the islands, they had to think that this was hopeless. When they finally broke these Africans and made them slaves and brought them to plantations here in America, there still had to be this sense of hopelessness.
Right.
But somehow, through all of that, we've always maintained this idea, this concept of being free. Is it because young people think they're free now, or is there a difference in mentality, or, I mean, is there just that true sense of hope?
I think what it is when we had slavery, when we didn't have our civil rights, it was we had something tangible to compare it to. Like, obviously we're not free, because if we were, this is what we'd be doing. And so civil rights came along and it kind of pushed everything under the covers. And so now how do you prove that we're not free? So it's like, even though public education is clearly subpar, it's not necessarily a black thing, it's because of poverty. So how do you fight that when you can't say only black people are impoverished, white people are impoverished too? So I think the issue is that everything is so underground now. It's how do you fight that? To compare to something, it's when all of the police cracked down on crime. They put a lot more cars out, but what that did to the crime is instead of putting it on the busier streets, it pushed it back into the neighborhoods. And so even when you try to crack down on something, it's not going to go away. If anything, it just gets harder and harder to push back on because it gets more and more underground and harder to prove. So I think a lot of youths, without even realizing it, are starting to realize that this is harder to fight now that you don't have tangible proof for it. And it becomes, is it a black thing? Is it an impoverished thing? Is it because we're too young? And so they're fighting 3 wars at once: age, poverty, and their race.
Wow, that's quite interesting. That's a different perspective that I'm used to hearing. But let me just push a little bit further.
Okay.
You're a young person, and because I know a little bit about what you're doing and which you'll share later on in the show, but what drives you? You don't have a sense of hopelessness. You have, I see your future looks very bright. So what is driving you?
What drove me was my mom. She had me very young, only 16,
Okay.
but she never stopped going to school. And that's actually what she attributes my ability to read to, is because she would read her textbooks to me when I was a baby. And so having someone who beat the odds right there in front of you, you're waking up to this person, they're the last person you see before you go to bed, it's constant motivation. So you're constantly looking at someone who has beat the odds, and it kind of makes you realize, well, if they did it, I definitely can do it too, because I didn't have a baby at 16. I have no excuse not to do it. And especially a lot of my friends, number one, they came from broken homes. Their parents weren't such a great source of motivation. A lot of them haven't even finished high school, or they're not carrying great jobs. So it's kind of like, but your parents are the first people you look up to. So you kind of see, well, my mom's not doing that great, but she's not doing that bad either. She was able to raise me, she was able to do this, and my brothers. And so instead of getting the idea that this isn't a good thing for me, you kind of begin to emulate your parents. And your parents are never gonna say, oh my gosh, I'm in this horrible place in my life. They don't wanna hurt your feelings. I even know some parents who, because of jealousy, didn't wanna push their kids further than them. So I think without realizing it, by accepting our status in life, we're telling our children that this is fine as well and you can live. And so we're just perpetuating this idea that poverty and not holding a great job, not going to college is just fine.
Share with us about some of the things that you've done. I mean, you've got an amazing history here, starting at a very young age and being in media for a while, and you're still relatively very young. So you want to tell us about some of your first things that you've done?
Wow, sure. When I was about 16, my teacher asked me to cover, every year the school does this convention to show off all of the schools and kind of get recruits. And one day I was there, and she told me to pass out flyers at the front of the door. So I'm doing it, and there's this older guy, and we just start talking. He's asking me about what I want to do in life, and I tell him journalism. And he goes, do you know who I am? And I'm like, in my head, am I supposed to? Who is this man? And then he tells me he's chief of communications at Rochester City School District. And he told me to send in some samples that I've done and he'll get back to me. So in my 9th grade class, I took a journalism class. So I luckily had something prepared. I tweaked it a little bit and I sent it to him. And he didn't respond to me for like a month. And I was like, oh my God, Mom, I'm not gonna get the job. And she was like, no, you email that man right now. So I emailed him, and maybe 2 days later, he said, oh my God, I'm so sorry I didn't get back to you. And then he set up a meeting for maybe 2 weeks later to not only, I thought it was to interview, but he had me start that day.
Okay.
And then I worked there for maybe a year and a half. And then I ended up with Talkback for Teens, and let's see what else. And wow. And then this past January, I ended up working with Tavis Smiley for a Remaking America tour.
Before you go there, tell us a little bit about that. That had to be exciting.
Tavis Smiley?
Yes.
Oh God, how that even, it's like everything just happens from fluke. I don't even know how things happen. So my teacher introduced me to Twitter, and I was one of those students who were like, I am never gonna like Twitter. Lo and behold, 5 days later, I'm tweeting probably every hour. So I follow Cornel West on Twitter, and he mentioned, oh, if you want to help Tavis Smiley cover his Remaking America tour, tweet this guy who was like his publicist. So I tweet the guy and I'm telling him, hey, I run 2 blogs. One was RIT, it was race integration and tolerance on campus, and another blog for Talkback for Teens. So I just do it. I'm like, it's a tweet, what's gonna happen? He emails me back and is like, we've chosen you to be one of 23 bloggers, I believe. And he said, this is what you have to do. I emailed him back, said, I can't go to Washington, D.C. He said, well, we'll have it on C-SPAN, just watch it on there. We still want you to cover it. So I ended up doing that, and a month, not even a month later, maybe 20 days later, Cornel West came to my school. And one of my professors was like, you know what, you guys just email him. What's the worst that can happen? He won't email you back. So I emailed him and I was saying, hey, I'm writing a piece on poverty on campus and how much more prevalent it's becoming. I've worked on Remaking America tour with you and Tavis Smiley. And he emailed me back and was like, I would be honored to be interviewed. And I find out later that day I actually created some bad blood with some other people because he canceled all of his other interviews, and I was the only person he allowed an interview from that day.
Oh. And how did that interview go? What kind of person is it? Because I want to be Cornel West.
He is scary. Like, he is a great listener. I will say that he zones in on you. Like, we were probably this close from each other. I could probably count the lines in his irises. It was ridiculous. But it was really interesting to hear him actually listen to me, hear what I was asking him, and respond. So it was only about a 15-minute interview because he was so friendly to his audience that when he left the stage, everyone who came up to him, he hugged and gave autographs. So that kind of cut down our interview time, but it was amazing.
I've been in media for quite a while. I had a newspaper in Florida. And that's when I began to see the power of media. I began to see that with this, we can tell our own story.
Right.
And I saw the ability that we have to tell our story. And many times they'll tell you that, I guess, we're supposed to be objective. Mm-hmm. And we're supposed to write it with, I guess, without an opinion. Mm-hmm. But for me, I didn't listen to that. I wrote it stating my opinion because I thought where I was coming from and the subject that I was talking about, it needed to have an opinion put to it. Do you think that, what do you think about that, or how will you approach subject matters that you find near and dear and close to you?
I think it's a good idea to have both objective and opinionated news. Some people who are maybe a little bit stubborn are less likely to listen to opinionated news. And so sometimes you can push your agenda a little bit in objective news and make them listen. But I think my main issue with objective versus opinionated is you have news outlets who claim to be objective, but they're actually clearly opinionated. So I think once we get past the stigma that news can't be opinionated, we'll be able to cover things so much better. And we'll have truly objective news outlets and truly opinionated news outlets who can say, this is what we believe, and hey, you can listen to it or you don't have to. And then people who just want purely news can go to an objective source, and not to only single out Fox, but Huffington Post and New York Times is a little bit more liberal. So you go to that. We can separate them a little bit easier and draw that line.
Let's talk about what you do here, especially at the station.
Okay.
Tell us about the show that you have and the name of the show.
So the show is Talk Back for Teens. I was first introduced to it when I was working with Safe Sex Inc., which is a local group of youth trying to educate their peers on safe sex and sexuality. And one time, John, who is the host, was having a show about sexuality and teen pregnancy. And me and maybe 2 or 3 other coworkers came on the show, and of those 3, he asked another 2 back to the next episode, and we came back and we participated in that show. And basically what happens is he brings a bunch of youths together, and for an hour you discuss one issue that is hitting teens and community. So you talk about your personal experiences with it, you talk about your opinions. And so after that next show, I want to say maybe it was that show or the next one, he asked me and that coworker if we would like to co-host. We said, sure, why not? And lo and behold, the next show, when it is our time to co-host, this coworker suddenly has something to do, and he just left me high and dry. So I had to host it all by myself. I'm freaking out. I've never talked to that friend again since then. And ever since then, I've been teen co-host, and I just host it by myself.
Go into a little bit more on some of the topics that...
Sure.
Okay.
We've done bullying, I know it was a few, teen violence, sexuality. We're also hoping to do an April episode in which we talk about college, getting ready for our youth to go to college, telling them what to expect. And what we were thinking is having a few college students actually come in, preferably freshmen, come in, talk about their first year and tell youth this is what you look out for, this is what you should focus on, and just getting them ready for higher education. Just mostly we also talked about what makes a teacher a good teacher and what makes a teacher a bad teacher. Mm-hmm. And that was actually one of my favorite episodes, to see that they could not clearly define what was a good teacher, but they could clearly define what was a bad teacher. And I thought it was very interesting because my mom is a teacher, and a lot of them were saying, oh, the good teacher has to be willing to stay after school and just devote all of her time to them. And I said, well, what about her kids at home? My mom did that, and I actually lost quite a few hours with my mom. And that just took them aback. I guess they don't think that teachers have a family and an outside home. So I love the show just because you really get to see where youth's minds are, and you get to see how they interact with society and what they actually think of society. So often you only see them interact with it. You don't see why they interact in the way that they do. And it's just a great way to look inside their minds.
I appreciate that statement because you're absolutely right. I think that there truly is a generational gap.
Yes.
Okay, and I can remember, it seems like 100 years ago, that when we were younger, and then as you become older, you become a parent, mm-hmm. and everything changes. And now I'm really trying to understand young people, because it is so vastly different. Mm-hmm. I guess because of all that we have now. I guess you were born and the internet was here. When I was born, there was no internet.
I can't imagine that.
I mean, yes, can you imagine? No cell phones, none of this stuff.
Oh my God.
And now here is a generation of young people that this is basically all they know.
Right.
And therefore, your thought process has to be, well, your access to information is so much greater. Mm-hmm. And therefore, because of this access, I assume, what you're gathering, what you're being able to bring into yourself. Can you explain that to us?
Should be more substantial,
yes,
right?
Okay.
Okay, so the issue with the internet is you can look up whatever you want. So if you're already not interested in current events, you're not interested in what's going on, you're less likely to go out and educate yourself. Also, we notice with the internet is, I don't want to say it directly, but it's more likely to make your attention span shorter. There's actually been a study that if a page doesn't load immediately, probably within the first 3 seconds, you're more likely to not visit that page again. You're gonna click off of it, you're gonna go back to the page before. So the thing about that is, if something doesn't interest us immediately, we're not gonna keep watching it. And another thing with the news is, since about the 80s, sound bites have went from 40 seconds to less than about 10. So we're kind of pandering into this idea that we have to be interested all the time, and if we're so used to being entertained and interested, we're going to use the internet to further that. We're not going to go on NewYorkTimes.com and look up, oh my gosh, what's happening in an Arab Spring. We don't care. We're going to go on Media Takeout. We're going to go on all of these other websites that probably kill more brain cells than help us build them. But if we're so used to being entertained and we're so used to having all of the control and not having news shoved in our face and down our throats, we're going to seek out what interests us. So all that creates is, they say Republicans live in a bubble, but a lot of times we live in our own bubble, and we're not seeking outside information to educate ourselves.
Is that a good thing?
God, no.
Oh, okay.
No.
So where does this evolve to?
Well, you're seeing where it's going now. You're seeing more out. You would have never thought in the 40s that we would have a whole news show dedicated to celebrities. But you see it all the time. We have Access Hollywood, Entertainment Tonight. So what you're seeing is that instead of the news has always been about the people it's supposed to be, but now they're trying to be so much about the people, and now they're being profit driven, that they're kind of just like, well, instead of what do you need, what do you want? So you're seeing news kind of pander to what we want and not exactly what we need. And it'll probably just get worse and worse.
Is this what young people are saying? And is this what they're adapting to?
You see it all of the time. Like, my mom talks about it all the time in her class, how students feel like they have the okay to say we're bored, as if it's okay that school should be entertaining you. And she tells them all the time, I'm not being paid to entertain you, I'm being paid to teach you. And I think that idea is spreading, where we just think everything in the world should entertain us, and if it doesn't, it's wrong. Not, oh my God, well maybe it's right, just in a different way. No, it's just wrong. So I think it's not a good thing at all.
Oh my! But because now that takes education into a whole nother problem, because many of us have been looking at education, not that young people aren't academically inclined, but we've been looking at the non-academic reasons why students have been failing. And we've been thinking it's because of poverty, their family structure, and things of that nature. But if we're looking at it because they want to be entertained, that's a whole nother issue.
Right.
Then how did we get there?
Well, it's just everything else in the world is expected to entertain us. I mean, if everything is supposed to have one purpose and they make it seem like that one purpose is the right purpose, then you're going to expect that one thing, and you're going to see that this isn't working for me, but everything else is. So you're going to assume, well, this isn't working for me because it's not committing to that one purpose that everything else is committing to. So in your mind, you're going to say, well, school is boring, I don't have to go, and that's why it's not working for me. It's not working because I'm bored in class. School was never supposed to be entertaining, and you hear it a lot when students say, my teacher just doesn't like me. So, yeah.
As a journalist and coming into a world of this, what do you see your future as, and what kind of journalist do you project yourself to be?
Well, wow, that's a good question. What I want to do with my work is to bring all of those people who don't look at news the way that it should be, and kind of make them realize that this is how news is supposed to be. If news is always entertaining, then how much is it really teaching you if it's focusing more on entertainment than actual news? So what I would love to do through my work is to, is to bring people to the light and make them realize that this isn't how everything is supposed to be, and this is how news can be, and it's okay. Like, it can be that medicine that you don't want to take, and maybe it tastes like cherry, which is the worst medicine in the world, but it doesn't have to taste like orange. You can stomach it, and you'll be just fine. Just a little bit of tough love in there.
Okay. Because it seems as if this is all part of dumbing down America, if you will. And it's hard to believe that now we just want to be entertained.
Right.
And where do we go from that level after entertainment is no longer a fix, if you will? Are younger people younger than you? Are they viewing, because there's going to come a time that you're going to be sitting in this chair and talking to a younger person.
Wow.
And what are they going to be talking about? Where do you go after entertainment?
Right.
And how do we begin to really turn this around? Because the reality is, it's like what you're talking about. We've got to find a way to reach people to understand that we live in a world consumed with people, consumed with issues. I know Syria is a long way away from here, but what goes on over there has an impact of what's happening here.
Right.
We may not think that politics has a real direct connection to us, but yet we see it does. You see what they did in 9/11.
Right.
It's because we, as a group of people, not just age difference wise, but we as Americans, one of the things that we do, we elect politicians into office, and then we lead them to do whatever it is that they do. They make these foreign policies that you and I have no idea that they're making. And this foreign policy could now upset a nation.
Right.
And the next thing you know, we've got a travel advisory saying Americans don't travel over here. And so I think that these are some of the issues that we're going to have to find a way to get young people to understand. When I was young, we thought that we were going to overthrow the country. We thought we were going to have a revolution. Okay, and that was our thing. Instead of entertainment, we were going to be the new government, however that whole thing was going to turn itself out. But then reality hit or whatever, and now we are the very things that we were fighting against. In other words, now we became the establishment. I became a very successful business owner. Others went into professions, and we took the leather jackets off and put the Marxes up on the shelf, and became deeply engrossed into the American culture and economics. And I believe that this is not going to stop. I think we're still going to have that. But I think that if we don't get more people involved, I think what's going to happen is that we're going to have this really increased poverty. And those that aren't impoverished are going to be informed. And to me, that's just about as bad as being in poverty. So how do we turn this around? How do we get young people? Because I think that if we don't start getting young people to get involved, and especially getting people to start looking at education, I said this on a few shows before, and one of the things that helped us as a people get to where we are was education. I always state about Frederick Douglass when he was still on the plantation and his master's wife was educating him and his the young man next to him. And when the master found out, immediately stopped it because he
Right.
said if you educate him, he'll equate that with freedom. And so that became our battle cry all the way up until at least the 60s and the early 70s. And it seems now that education has just really fallen off the globe here. We're not interested. And this is around the world. It isn't just here in America. Young people have become so disengaged from education. And I know that we're dealing with an antiquated system that was, designed in the 1900s, 19th century, and we're trying to educate young people in the 21st century with this old standard. But we can't turn it into entertainment. We can't make this, I don't know, do we start singing the ABCs? I don't know, do we start rapping, the one, two, threes? How do we begin to change that? The reason why I'm asking you is because, you're a young person, and I know that you like entertainment, but you're also seeing the other side of this. You're also seeing your professional side. What are you going to do to make a living?
Right.
You're also seeing how you can also make an impact in the world. And I know that there have to be more of you out there.
Well, I think the issue right now is that for centuries we've had a clear and defined enemy. Excuse me, but it was the white man.
Yeah.
But right now it's, as you become more and more educated about poverty, if anything, you become more and more confused. Because for a while you realize, you look around, it's mostly black people or minorities, and you're like, we're the only people affected. But then you start looking at statistics and you see, well, actually, it's more white people who take advantage of government aid than black people because it's more white people in America. So then you're like, well, if black people, Hispanics, and white people are affected by poverty, then who do we fight? So then you say, oh, well, let's fight the corporations. Well, if you fight the corporations, they're the people who employ you. So when you fight them, you are taking a gamble at your own well-being and your safety and your job establishment. So, and then you also have presidents who are saying, oh no, we're trying to fight this, we're doing that. But so as you become more educated and you even start looking at models in other countries, and you see that America has tried to emulate other models in other countries, but how exactly do you fight poverty? And so by the time you're done, even after just one day, even if you just look on Wikipedia, by the time you get to the end of that article, you have no idea who your enemy is. And how do you fight someone who's not really there? You're just taking blind swings and so I think that's the issue right now. We have no idea who we're fighting. So.
Well, I would think that the enemy itself would be poverty and ignorance.
But how do we fight poverty?
But how we fight that, I think, is through education, by learning. How do we move from this stage?
Right, I thought that too, but then you look at a recent statistic, and actually more than ever, there are more people with 4-year degrees who are, once they're done with college, going back into poverty. Just myself, I'm double majoring, I'm looking at possible dual minors, and just for my first year of college, it cost me $20,000. So the cost of education is going up so high that it is no longer a way to fix poverty. If anything, it exacerbates the problem because, number one, you're coming out with a degree, but you're dealing with a rocky job market. You're coming out with student loans. You're coming out with credit card debt. So it sounds bad, but actually I read this study where one person did go to college, one person didn't. And a lot of people are saying if you don't go to college, but you actually, you save up well and you actually may do better than the person who goes into higher education financially. But so that's the issue. Education no longer really fixes the problem. now it's actually kind of exacerbating it.
That's truly an interesting set of dynamics. And now I come back to how do we fix this? How do we turn this around? How do we and this is a big question that's being asked once again around the world, because you're absolutely right. How do we talk about economics when at the end of the week, I mean, the economy we don't know what it's going to be like. And those are the very questions that we're looking at, and I can see why young people become turned off, because to get an education, but yet they're saying the job market isn't steady any longer. And now as those of us in the media, what is our responsibility in the reporting of this? Because I believe that we have a responsibility to be able to bring this information out there, and at the same time trying to look for solutions, look for things that can stop these things, looking for ways to be able to generate ways for people to live better and to see that we can find our way out of it. And especially with the access to information that we have today. I like to think when I first started my newspaper, I had to go to the library and look what it's called microfiche. Okay, I mean this was so old, and you had to sit there. It was hard. I mean, it was really, really hard. And even when I started my newspaper, we had to actually cut and paste. I mean, we had to literally cut the paragraphs and paste them on boards and all of this stuff. It was really something. And then with the advent of the internet, for me, it was the greatest thing that ever happened.
Yes.
Because now I could go to a library and just sit there and gather all this information up. But I see that this really isn't used like that. Just as you're saying, it's more entertainment driven. It is more trying to, I mean, there are more people that are looking at the simplicities of life than rather than what really life is. I mean, it would be a great and wonderful thing that if life could be that simple, but it isn't. And that's what gives us, and I think that's what determines success from failure, are the people that are able to look at life, problem solve, and to be able to move on. And I think that that's what gives life its meaning.
Right.
And I think that somehow young people are losing that sense of what life really means, that there is more to life than just, I mean, I know this sounds crazy because when I was young, all I thought it was a party too. I mean, we went to the discos.
Oh my God.
Okay, I can remember doing that, and that's what we thought life was. But now this is so much further than that, because I mean, we had to go somewhere. I mean, now you can have this on your cell phone. I mean, you can literally, and that's another thing too. It seems like young people have become individualists. I mean, everybody is their own person. Once again, when I was growing up, it was a collective. We moved and everything was as a group. But now I'm noticing young people are very individualized. It's me, it's I.
Right.
And how do we begin to deal with that? Can you talk to us about that?
Wow, that's a hard question. I think the fact that individualism is so celebrated and everyone wants to be their own person, and I think, oh gosh, this is a hard one. I think we need to recognize that unless individualism only works for certain people, some people have to accept the fact that they may just have to be followers. As long as you follow a good leader, not everyone in the world can be a good leader. And I think we stress the fact, oh, you have to be a leader, you have to be a leader. but some people, they don't have the capacity to be a leader. It takes a lot to be a leader. And I think that everyone wants to be their own person, but unless you know exactly what you are doing and unless you're educating yourself on how the world works, how the system works, you're not going to beat a system that you have no idea the mechanics of it. And I think that everyone wants to take that huge leap without taking the baby steps in between. And it's those baby steps that get you there, and that leap, you're just facing a huge wall. So I think we need to teach people that individualism is only so far as long as you understand what leaders have to do. So
Is there room for leaders? When I was growing up, we had leaders, Malcolm X, Dr. King, and on and on. Is there room for leaders anymore?
of course, there's always room for leaders.
Okay.
It's just what society deems a leader. I think now that, it's who we decide who is a leader. It's whenever we see someone who kind of goes against the grain, we're kind of worried. We're saying, oh, why should they be a leader? And we choose people to be leaders who we see kind of go with the grain. But you have to choose people who make the system work for them, not who work for the system. Because the people who work for the system, you don't need that much understanding to work for somebody. To beat something, you have to understand how it works. And I think those are the people that we need to follow. And I think there is always room for leaders, because if every single person is a leader, then you can't be a leader in the same thing. So if you're leading this cause and that cause and this cause and that cause, what do we focus on? And I think you just need one solid leader. And a great example of why we need leaders is the whole Occupy Wall Street movement. If we had somebody to communicate with us exactly what they wanted, it could have been a lot stronger, instead of just hearing, well, we want this and we want that, and everyone in that movement trying to be a leader, and instead of just electing one leader to speak for them, which could have worked a lot better. So there's always room for leaders.
Do young people have causes? Are there certain causes that young people are behind?
I would love it if we had causes. I think right now how it feels, even for myself, it feels like every single cause has already been taken up. Every single body wants to make their impact on the world. There's the animal cause, there the females in China and India cause. Everything has already been taken up. And so I think for youth, number one, you have to, instead of a cause coming to you, like some of us were more fortunate to have, we were like, oh, civil rights has to be taken. So all of these causes have already been taken, and so you have to go out and identify your cause, which means you have to educate yourself. And if we're already not doing that first step, we're not going to find our own cause. And I think what we expect from everything in the world is for everything to come to us. And that's not at all what happens to a cause. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a cause. You have to work for something for it to be a cause. But I think that because youth are so just everything should be done for them, we're not as ready to take on a cause. And so until you have that work ethic more prevalent in youths, and until youths can be okay with having that work ethic and not be ashamed of it, you're not going to see as many youths taking up a cause.
I'm glad that we're having this discussion because I assume that this is what your program is about, getting young people to talk about these issues. And I would really like to be able to have more young people come on the show and talk, because I think that people my age, we are at such a disconnect that we just we don't get it. And then also there's another part of this. We are at both extremes. They're either all good or either it's all bad. Okay, and this is how we constantly deal with this. Or either we focus so much on the ones that are all bad,
Right.
that we never talk about the ones that are good. And I guess much of that can be confusing because there are many more good young people than there are bad people, young people. And so I think those are issues that we have to be able to begin to realize and focus and face. How do you young people feel about us as adults? Have we let you down? Have we been a disappointment, or how do you see us?
It's actually interesting because on the show where we're telling teens, hey, you get a whole hour to talk about whatever grinds your gears, and we barely have any participation whatsoever. So it's just kind of interesting in regards to how we view adults. It's who knows? We're so focused on ourselves that I don't think we think outside of our little bubble to think, hey, have adults let us down? If anything, I think over recent decades, our perception of what an adult is has become so skewed. Don't forget, a lot of us grow up in homes where the parents had them so young that they've never fully grown up themselves. So in regards to what we view as an adult is kind of skewed from what you may view as an adult. So in regards to what we will see as one, we actually don't have an opinion on them. If you don't entertain us, then you kind of don't matter.
Oh man, I'm listening to you, and I'm just seeing. It is almost like the destruction of the family structure.
Yeah.
Because a grandmother, when I was growing up, was someone that was 70, 80 years old. I mean, a grandmother was old. Okay. Your mother and father were in their 50s when you were still in high school. I mean, the idea of having a young parent, I mean, and then the ones that did have young parents, I mean, we were just fascinated by that because, because it was out of the norm for that situation. And then as I'm seeing now how young parents are today, and I can now see this serious breakdown. And I mean, there has to be a way that we've got to be able to fix that, to get this back, because how do we survive as a people? Where do we go? I mean, this is devastating us as a community, devastating us as a country, and if we don't have this interact. And in all other cultures, there's always been elders. And the elders have always been looked up to because of their information, their knowledge. And if it's a point now to where if the elders aren't being looked up to, as a matter of fact, many of them are being totally disrespected. I mean, now young people almost have no respect for elderly people. And I just see that there's such a deterioration. And I'm at my wit's end of trying to understand young people and how do we. The reason why I say get this back, because that worked.
Right.
Okay, that somehow sustained us. That's what got us through all of this. And I think that when people my age and those of us that are concerned, what we're concerned about is how is this going to get you or this next generation through this. This has always been our greatest concern. Now, we may not have had enough tools in our tool belt to be able to provide what we thought or what we think that you may need, but we did the best that we could with what we had. But it seems like somehow I get the feeling that we've let young people down. I get the feeling that we haven't left a legacy that would make you want to carry this into the future, something that you feel good about. And I think that, to me, that is a serious disconnect. And I don't know if I'm hearing this correctly, but it seems like if you have no true understanding of, if you're inside this bubble and everything is about where you are at right now. I mean, if you're in the bubble, what about the ones that are coming after you?
Right.
Okay, I mean, what is their legacy? What do you leave them?
I think the issue right now is we want to combat this so much that we're kind of just pointing fingers at each other. You see the community trying to take it on, and you see the schools trying to take it on and say, oh, we should be their parents. But I kind of feel like it's not so much the community, it's not so much the school, it's the parents. Like, I think we can't be afraid to tell our parents, you have to grow up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this whole idea came from the fact that, yes, my mom did have me young, but me and her, we were not friends until I went to college. And even now, we're not like, hey, bud, but we can talk to each other way more different than when I was a kid. And I think that right now, so many parents are so young. Number one, they don't know how to parent. Number two, they just want to be their kids' friends. Because if you're a parent, you're accepting that you're kind of old. And it's a way to hang on to your youth. And sometimes, especially now with so many broken homes, your child is all you have. You don't have a boyfriend, you don't have your baby's father. And so you try and hang on to this child so much that you end up being their friend and kind of not doing them as well. In regards to the baby boom of '93, and that was when my generation came along. And so now being 16, 17, 18, a lot of my friends are starting to get pregnant, and I'm seeing the exact same thing with them. I have a few friends who their fathers aren't sticking around, and they're talking about how they're all this baby has, but if anything, that baby is all they have. And so you cling to this child so much, and when your parent had you young and they never grew up, your idea of what a parent is that parent. And so we parent the way we are taught by our parents to parent.
Exactly.
And so you just see this repeat and repeat. So I think we need to focus more on our parents and not be so scared of them like we are, instead of trying to make the community and the school pick up the parents' slack. That's their job, to parent their kids, and we can't do that for them.
I truly thank you so much. I mean, this hour goes by so quickly. I truly thank you for coming on. You've given me a great deal of insight, and I'm certainly hoping that our viewing audience has been able to pick up on this as well. And once again, I've got to have you come back, because I got to come on your show and ask some questions, because I think that I see you as a very young, dynamic person. And if I had to place my bet on tomorrow's leadership, I'm placing it on you. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you.